Probably due to my recent pinball acquisition, I've been in a Castlevania mood, and I know you guys are subbed for one of three things: Castlevania, Mortal Kombat, or my devilish good looks. One trend I've noticed a lot of gamers covering lately is liminal spaces in games. At first, I thought this was a fairly obscure topic, but I've begun to see more and more people make videos about this. The first one I saw was Any Austin's Unremarkable and Odd Places in Ocarina of Time a few months ago. But they just keep turning up. I always found the idea fascinating, so I wanted to do my own video on this. If you're not hip to the concept, well, I'm here to help you out. You see, on the aesthetics wiki, because of course that's a thing, the liminal space is defined as the location between two other locations or states of being. Think about things like hallways, vestibules, foyers, etc. Castlevania 64 is an odd game. When it came out, it was beloved, and then for years it was talked about poorly. And now people have started to come back around to it. One thing almost all reviewers will say about the N64 Castlevanias is that they've got atmosphere. And I would agree. So much so, that's probably why I care so much about these wonky early 3D games. So today, here's some of my favorite liminal and odd spaces in Castlevania 64. The first one I wanted to talk about was this room in the villa situated between the main entrance hall and the Rose Garden. Now those areas contain a mini-boss and a critical NPC encounter respectively, but this room is solely for moving the player from one place to another, and it's a very interesting room at that. So this has some simple N64 graphic trickery going on, I wanted to point out first of all. If you look over here, this is obviously supposed to be an outdoor section. If you've ever been in the South and visited a big home, perhaps an antebellum home even, with a wraparound screened-in porch or something, this is what this reminded me of. So they've got this simple skybox cloud texture over here that's just kind of moving. It's done with some very rudimentary N64 era level tricks. This is just basically a loaded map, and then that's a texture that's actually wrapping around this outside part of this area here, and it just kind of moves around in a nice little pattern here. You can also see this gate texture here, which is like dividing you from the rest of the world and outside the castle. And then there's some very mushy stretched green textures out here to represent perhaps some close by shrubbery, or perhaps it's meant to be some far off forest texture. But this is just a nice little room, and you can't hear it very well, but there's usually a thunderstorm type sound texture that plays here during the day. And also as the time changes in this area, the lighting effects will actually change. We're not going to stay here very long just to keep the video from getting boring and help keep it moving along. But the lighting in this area will actually change as the time of day changes. As you can see, it's nighttime right now, so it's just kind of dark. However, in the evening it will get a red tint, and like I said, during the day there will be a thunderstorm going on out there, which uses a very simple rudimentary effect. I may go back and add that in post just so you can see what that looks like. But just a very unusual space. It's one I think about often when I think of this game. There's of course candles over here, as is tradition for Castlevania. You can actually whip these, unfortunately, unlike most candles in the game. But it is lit. It's a nice little space. It's very realistic. I could see this showing up in like a real southern home, honestly. And you can see there's kind of a moon texture over there, hiding like a half moon texture. That could be an emulation glitch. I'm not sure. It's easier to capture this footage via emulating the game, so that could just be not showing up well. But still, a very interesting and unusual space in this game that you will only pass through this about 2 or 3 times, depending on the route you like to take. Some people like to walk back through the mansion. Some people like to go backwards through the Rose Garden once they get the copper key. But still a space you will probably walk through maybe 2-3 times. and then just forget about. This next area is in the Tower of Science, and yes, I know you can't normally use Reinhardt to access the Tower of Science, but this room is the same regardless of whether you're hacking a character into it or using it. This is at the very top of the first elevator you encounter in the Tower of Science, right before this door, which is marked with, I believe that's supposed to be a 1, even though there's a little gap and it looks like it could be a 2. The interesting thing about this room that most people probably don't know is if you go through this door and try to come back, you actually can't. The door is locked and it will not register any input when you try to come back through it. But this is just a fairly unremarkable room. You can see the brick textures from the Tower of Science and also these kind of weird ceiling textures here. I call them weird because they're very obviously tiled, probably from the rest of the level, but the room actually divides them in half, it looks like, just because they probably just slapped it up there, not thinking that, you know, some 20 years later anybody would make some sort of silly video like this talking about it. You can also see the same kind of mishmash down here with the ground texture. There's like this square which looks like something from one of the other rooms, but it's cut in half by these tiles, just by nature of this wall being here. And I can assume if you could get out of bounds and look at the ground here, the other side of this texture would just be floating out here. But still an interesting space. It's a one-way though, because if you go through here you can't get back. But the interesting thing is if you take this elevator back down, it will transition you back to the lower area, which is unusual for games. You'd think if they didn't want you to go back, they would just stop this elevator and make it not work. But this will allow you to go back. And you probably would die if you jumped off while the elevator was like this. This is one thing that Castlevania games have always done, which I found interesting, all the way back to the NES games. There were areas with stairs where you could climb and transition to another screen, but going back down the stairs would take you back to the other screen despite there literally being no reason to go back, because it was a game about going forward and there were no collectibles or items or anything like that. So just a very interesting design decision that they put the time in to make some staircases take you back to lower maps, even though theoretically there was nearly no reason to go back. But this is just another such space. This third space I want to show you is from Castle Center. So as you know, Castle Center is one of the more padded stages in the game, probably to make it longer. There's two sections where you have to carry something called Magical Nitro to blow up cracked walls to progress in the stage. This is a room you'll run into during your second, more difficult Magical Nitro run. So this leads back towards the rooms filled with traps and bottles and vampires and whatnot. And this area over here leads to the room with the big lizards that spit fire and the large gears. Probably one of the most difficult rooms in the game for the beginning player. This is just a nice little room you go through. There may be some jewels or something hidden in those two knight armors. But other than that, most players will not think very much about this room. And I stopped to look at it. And there's this nice little portrait hanging over here, which is probably, when the developers were developing this game, they went to France and toured several other locations for architectural inspiration. And this could be a portrait or a painting that they saw and scanned in later, or perhaps it's something they pulled from an encyclopedia and put in the game. Also above it is this little demon head statue looking texture, which I would guess most people have never even noticed. I had not seen this until I stopped to make this video. So that was really cool that I got to see that and appreciate the nice little artwork. It's got some classic N64 era sprites that rotate to always face you, as you can see with this little chandelier texture up here. And interestingly enough, they have chosen to make the fires on the candelabra part of the texture. So the fire is just very static and it rotates to face you. No matter where you are, you can come back here and look at it, and you can see it's just rotating to be wherever I am, wherever the player is. But still an interesting room nonetheless. It doesn't appear there's anything in the axe armor here. Oh, this one's got 500 gold, so that's interesting. And then you've got these kind of like lattice windows, I assume that's supposed to be. But yeah, an interesting space that you can check out. Unfortunately, not much to see or do, but it's a neat place nonetheless. I just wanted to jump back to the villa right quick to show you this next space. So this is after the aforementioned Rose Garden, which is after the first space we looked at. And so you end up in this nice little bottom of the stairs area here There's a candle which you can whip. I've already grabbed the power up or whatever out on this playthrough, so unfortunately it's empty. But there is this nice little empty space here where there's just not a lot to look at other than up to the second floor. And then there's this rather plain wall where the texture just stops halfway up. And then of course as you come around the stairs here, they've made this look kind of like a real manor or villa or something. And they've put some portraits of, the game calls them previous residents, ? That looks like a picture of Marie Antoinette or something. And then it comes up into this area here. Now obviously this is some N64 level design architecture, so the transition is kind of jarring and sudden. You know, goodness, Reinhardt could probably almost make the jump to the second floor. If he could jump maybe a little bit higher than he could, he might could get up there. I know Super Mario could. He could just wall kick. Wall kicks will work. Wall kick his way up there. But an interesting space nonetheless. But one that you unfortunately will not spend too much time with once you go through this part of the game. The next area is also in the villa, and this is the one on the immediate right when you first enter the villa proper. The first time you approach this door, probably it'll be the first one you try after beating the vampire mini-boss, you'll get a message saying that this is the servants' entrance and it's locked. And you'll probably forget about the area until later where you clear the hedge maze section. You end up in this room and click this door and it says the bar blocking the door has been lifted. Pretty much all that's in this space is a little white crystal to give you a chance to save. And then there's a candle there which you can bust for, I believe it's a roast beef or something like that. We'll continue on and exit the villa. And there's another neat little liminal space. So you'll end up in this little foyer area here, which is just kind of caged in. There's nothing you can really do. This goes back into the villa. And this goes into what's basically running the length of the hedge maze behind it. So we'll walk through this little area. On easy and normal, there's nothing back here. But if you're playing as Reinhardt or Carrie and you enter this area on hard mode, the Frankenstein gardener and his two dogs will jump back here for a boss battle. So it's a little more eventful on the hard difficulty. But on normal and easy, you're just going to pick up a key back here and that's it. Also interesting for this area is this gate. One thing I liked about Castlevania 64 is it tried to present itself as a real building, like a real place. And a lot of the stuff, other than having 6 or 7 towers in a castle that only has 4 visibly from the outside, a lot of these earlier areas try to make sense. Like this leads back to the forest, but it also just tells you that it's not necessary to open it. But you can look back here and you can see it's just kind of a, I think they meant for it to look like it turns and goes on, but unfortunately there's nothing back there. It's just kind of a flat texture area. But it does make sense that if this were a real villa, there would be multiple ways out of it. And this was supposed to represent that, if I had to guess. And this little flavor text here just says the inscription is unreadable, to make it a little bit more mysterious. Finally, I want to show you this area from Castle Center. Now this is after you blow up the first magical nitro wall and find your way up the library. And it's also on the other side of the giant planetarium area, which is probably one of the more memorable sections. There's a brain dead easy puzzle to solve there. But you get this nice little space here, which is kind of like a hidden library, hidden upstairs area that you have to kind of climb up into the planetarium from. It's got these weird little grate textures that line. I guess Dracula had some HVAC system installed up here to make it a little cooler. And they also thought to put flavor text on this desk, which is kind of unusual. There's no item hidden in it, but you do get this description that it is a, quote, simple but elegant desk. And I believe this, strangely, this bookcase doesn't have the texture or the flavor text that the ones downstairs has. They say that there are books on every topic under the sun, but none of them seem useful. But you can press check on this all day long and it doesn't give you anything. Still just a neat little space. Also, if you look at this button that you stand on to open this, it's got this little moon and star symbol. It's not unlike the Gerudo symbol from version 1.0 of Ocarina of Time. And this little door pops open nicely and of course leads to this big room. Apologies again for using the Legacy of Darkness version, which has lots of fog to make up and save memory and hide poor draw distance and all that. But still, it's an unremarkable room that leads to this much more remarkable room, as it were. An interesting space, very interesting space. So those are some weird and unusual liminal spaces in Castlevania 64. There's probably some more out there. If you'd like me to explore more, please leave a comment and tell me spaces that you found unusual, nostalgic, or interesting. I thought I would end the video here on top of one of the 4 towers that you fight mini bosses on, and you can see the castle keep up here. Unfortunately, it's been cut in half by the game's poor draw distance, but hey, they did make the clock on the clock tower actually match your stopwatch or your pocket watch in the top left of the screen, which is a super nice touch. And it's also interesting that there are 4 towers with 4 working elevators rendered here. I know I've said that 1,000 times before, but it's super interesting and a perfect place to end the video. So again, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video and would like to see more unusual spaces in Castlevania 64 or any of the other games I talk about on my channels, please leave a note down below. Not before. How could you leave a note before you watched it? I guess you would have to be in a liminal space to do that.